Pollination and its types. So, what is pollination? The process of transfer of pollen grains, from anther of a flower, to the stigma of same or different flower, is called pollination. Pollination is an essential step, as it brings the male and female gamete closer, for fertilization. This process was first discovered by Camerarius, in 1694. Now, let's see the types of pollination. First is self-pollination, which is also known as autogamy. And the second is cross-pollination, which is also known as allogamy. Self-pollination is the transfer of pollen grains from anther, to the stigma of same flower, or a different flower, produced on the same plant. There are two types of self-pollination. First is autogamy, and the second is gaetonogamy. Autogamy is the transfer of pollen grains from anther of a flower, to the stigma of the same flower. Autogamy takes place in bisexual flower, that is when a flower has both male and female reproductive parts. It occurs by cleistogamy and homogamy. Cleistogamy is the self-pollination that takes place inside a closed flower. And homogamy is fertilization that takes place as the stamens and pistil mature at the same time. Gaetonogamy is a kind of pollination, in which the pollen from the anther of one flower, are transferred to the stigma of other flower, born on the same plant. It occurs in plants with monoecious condition. This takes place in plants like maize. Now let's look at some of the advantages and disadvantages of self-pollination. Advantages of self-pollination includes no dependence on external agents for pollination, which causes minimum wastage of pollen grains, and maintains genetic purity. It is a sure process, and plants do not waste energy to produce special devices to attract agents for pollination, which makes it a more economical method. While the disadvantage is that new varieties cannot be produced, and thus the progeny becomes weaker due to lack of mutation. Their seeds have poor viability, and there are no possibilities of variation. Cross-pollination is transfer of pollen grains of the flower of one plant, to the stigma of the flower on the other plant of same or different species. It occurs in unisexual as well as bisexual flowers, and is common in nature. Just like self-pollination, cross-pollination is also divided into two types, that is xenogamy and hybridization. Xenogamy is the process in which the pollen grains are transferred to the flower of other plant of the same species. Examples includes papaya and castor. While hybridization is the process in which the pollen grains are transferred to the flower of other plant, of the different species or variety. And it is mostly done artificially. Just like self-pollination, cross-pollination has its own set of advantages and disadvantages. Advantages includes production of new varieties of plants, and vigor progeny which are more viable and resistant. It is responsible for genetic recombination which leads to production of seeds in self-sterile plants. It also introduces new desirable characters and eliminates undesired ones. Some of the disadvantages includes more wastage of pollen grain. Cross-pollination requires pollinating agents to get fertilized. We will be seeing about the agents of pollination in our next video. Cross-pollination is not a sure method of pollination, and it does not maintain the genetic purity. Also, plants have to develop various devices to attract agents for pollination. Thus it is not an economical method. This completes the types of pollination. Comment down if you have any doubts. Also watch the other videos on structure of flower and development of male gametes.